What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one I want to talk about what's going on with the overall market and give you guys some important warnings with the levels and formations we're seeing. I want to talk about the earnings that just came out this morning, what you should be watching for as time progresses. Before I begin the levels information, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks. If you put in $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and this offer ends very soon. Anyways, now let's break down what's going on with the charts. I just want to call out to this head and shoulders that's forming on Aapl right now. I did mention this yesterday, and you guys can see that this is starting to play out. If this continues, we have more downside targets to be watching for, which could slow the market down even more. So you want to be very, very careful. But first, let's talk about the big things that came out for today. As a reminder, we actually saw the New York Empire State Manufacturing Index below expectations, but this isn't that crazy. We have Waller giving a speech very soon at 11. We have the 3-month and the 6-month bill auctions coming out very, very soon as well. We're going to be watching for volatility at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be prepared for that 2 hours after the market opens and see how this ends up looking. But now I just want to call out, we had some big earnings coming out from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, PNC, and a few others. Let's just talk about how they looked thus far. So Goldman Sachs did better than expected asset management results. They ended up beating on EPS and revenue, and their guidance was actually kind of decent overall, not bad whatsoever. They did relatively well compared to the others out there. So Goldman Sachs did well, but Morgan Stanley, if you actually look at how this ends up looking, their earnings per share was below estimates, and their revenue was a little bit above estimates, but guidance was very mixed for Morgan Stanley. Some things were okay, some things not so great from what I was looking at when it comes to their sales and net liquidity and such. So they missed on EPS, which is why Morgan Stanley dropped. And overall, I would say it's kind of mixed overall when it comes to guidance. So some things were not so great. And another one that's very important is PNC, which missed on earnings. It missed on EPS and also beat on revenue. But from what I was looking at, I was actually looking at their projections as well. Not the strongest overall. We actually saw some drops in net income, and their expectations for 2024 were below what they initially expected. So a little bit weak on guidance. So overall, I would say that this is a mixed earnings report for banks. Some did okay, pretty well, such as Goldman. Other ones are not looking as great, such as PNC and Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley was kind of mixed, but PNC was kind of like a miss. So it's worth noting, very mixed stuff overall. But now I just need to skip over to the charts, guys, because I'm kind of late this morning, so I want to be kind of quick. What's going on? So I called this out yesterday about Aapl. We have this big head and shoulders like structure. I told you Aapl needs to try to hold this wedge and start breaking out for us to remain bullish. And now it's starting to gap down and sink. So it's looking kind of weak. Going to be watching support 182 flat. If we lose this, I mean, there's going to be a risk of us coming all the way down and getting very close to 180 now, coming all the way down towards this level down here. So it's looking pretty weak right now. Nice head and shoulder structure. This is going to drag the market down lower, as this is looking bearish right now. It's looking kind of bearish. Looks like you could test 182 and maybe lose it. Apple's looking kind of weak. If you want to get back up here, you want to see it break back above 183.5. If that breaks, our next target is 184.25. If we get above this 184.5 area, we could try to fill the gap back up to 185.6, and that's like the bullish case. But right now, like I said before, the bearish case looks more imminent, and we have this head and shoulders. The odds do favor this sinking a bit more, so it's still sinking at the time I'm recording this. There could be a drop coming, so we'll want to watch and see how Aapl does. As soon as we open, we'll see if this thing rebounds a little bit first before it continues lower. So look for a little pop when we open before we continue. But overall, the chart still looks bearish. Just want to call that out. On SPY, I have the same analysis on SPY essentially. If you look at SPY, this thing gap down. It's trying to push a little bit. We could push a little higher as we open. Watch and see how it reacts to 475 to 476. If we do get above 476, we could just be grabbing liquidity. But like I said in my earlier videos, I think ultimately there's downside coming for the markets, whether we pop and drop. So watch and see if they try to grab liquidity, try to fill this gap a little bit. This could happen early on, even before market open, before we continue lower. With Aapl sinking, this does give us a risk of coming back down. We're currently at 474.5 at the time I'm recording this. If we push up, watch 475 as resistance, 475.5 and 476. If we get above 476, there could be some chop between 476 to 478 temporarily before we go lower. And if you want to turn bullish, you need to see this thing close above at least, I would say, 477.5, which we haven't done so far. If we're bearish, we're going to be watching support 474-ish. We lose that. Watch 472.9. That tells us there's 472 flat, 471.6, and 470. In my opinion, what's very probable is if we do see a liquidity grab up here, we could see a pop and drop like move, or even like more downside, especially if we lose 474. There is a risk of more downside looking at the current trend, and SPY is looking kind of weak right now, favoring the bears a bit more. I want to mention that in the pre-market, Apple is playing a role in this sinking, but one critical support right now is the 4-hour 50 EMA at 473.5. If we end up losing that, this thing could start sinking lower. So 474 and 473.5, if we lose this, I expect it to come down to the 472s and a big drop is coming. The 4-hour is looking bearish right now, so especially if we lose the support at this 50 EMA on the 4-hour time frame, expect a bigger drop. It is favoring the bears a bit. It might actually push a little bit. Upon open, a little pop might come some shuffling here and there before it starts selling off more aggressively later on. But there is a risk of downside. I want to be honest with everyone. There's still an ultimate risk of downside. Whether we shuffle a bit first and then drop, or we just drop from here, there is a risk, but watch the 50 EMA very carefully. On the QQQ, we also call downside for this. Same thing, I'm going to be watching the 405.6 area, very close to 406. That's the key support at the 4-hour 50 EMA. So I'll be watching that as well. But going back to the chart, okay, here are some levels to watch for, and then here's what's very probable just looking at the technicals. So we have resistance, and it's actually testing this at 408. We also have a gap to fill, so it could try to push a little bit higher. Could try to fill this gap at 408.7, and then we have 410 basically as the next critical resistance, 412 above that. And for support, watch 405.7. If that fails us, we have 404. 404 to 403.8, that zone right there. 402, 399 to 400, and then we have 396.5 and 395. I think that the QQQ has some downside coming. We might try to finish filling this gap first just a little bit, then we might chop around a little bit and eventually get a sell-off later on. But there is a risk of some downside looking at some technicals right here, especially Aapl. And I just want to call out the PPO is already crossed on the QQQ. So it is showing signs of weakness, but we need confirmation for a bigger drop. We need to lose this 405 support. That's when we're going to see a bigger drop. So there's a risk of that happening in the future. It could take a few days, it could take a while, but eventually this does look like it's going to turn. So you want to be very careful with this, guys. We could initially push and shuffle up here and try to fill this gap in the 408s and then start selling off later on. So just be a little careful. But overall, guys, don't forget there is a risk of the downside, like I said earlier. Let's go over Tesla and Nvda. I think Tesla is also very important. There is some news about Elon Musk mentioning that he would prefer having a bigger stake in Tesla. And one thing you'll notice is that we had this downtrend on Tesla. We had this very, very strong downtrend, which is still acting as resistance. Tesla's still looking weak after some more negative news came out involving Elon Musk. So with Elon Musk saying what he had to say and more bad news coming out, unfortunately Tesla has lost the 200 moving average on the weekly time frame. Could Tesla pop a little bit as it opens? I mean, if it tries to get back above 217, it could try to push to fill the gap at 218.6 and then reject. But I'm not really counting on much upside, whether it pushes a little bit and then drops or drops from here. Ultimately, there's a risk of downside. If it loses 215, watch it come down to 213.8. If that fails, it's just 212 is our next target, 210, and lower levels like 207 and etc. I mean, there is a risk of more downside on Tesla, so you want to be very careful with it. Watch and see if we can try to break above this yellow trend line. First, if we break this first, we could attempt to fill the gap at 218 and then come back down. If it fails to break this, could just reject lower and make our way down towards 210. So it's looking kind of bearish overall. If 210 fails us, we also have another support around 207. I mean, if anything, guys, like I said, Tesla's just not looking that strong to me. Looking very weak with more negative news. And the best thing we could do is just accept, whatever's going on. So I'll be watching this zone right here if we do end up dropping. I just kept this from my memory. So like right here, I'll be watching this, if anything. That's going to be our next target if we lose 210. It's looking very weak. It might reject. Tesla is not looking the strongest. Watch and see if you reject off the trend line, or if we push and then drop, or if we just drop from here. Watch the levels I called out and just know it's not looking the strongest. Finally, for Nvda, excuse me, sorry guys, Nvda. So one thing that happened was we gapped down, got a bullish break from this wedge, and it's trying to grab liquidity up here between around the 550s. This is what I called out yesterday. This is what I was predicting would happen, but be careful up here between 550 and 552. Also, if it breaks 552, watch 555. But we're at tight resistance. If we end up failing here, we start rejecting. We're going to be watching for a move back down towards 546. If that fails, this 545 to 546 fails. Watch 542 and then 540 below that. In my opinion, Nvidia is looking not the best because yes, it's getting this little push, it's trying to grab liquidity, but as they try to grab these levels at this resistance, this is where we rejected 3 times, right? We got this first rejection, second rejection up here. We actually got 2 rejections here. We got 1, then 2. This is our 3rd rejection. Now we're at the 4th test of 550. If we reject again, just like how we did during these times, there's going to be a risk of downside, which could drag the QQQ down. So we're at resistance on Nvidia. Watch to see if this rejects. If you get this rejection, expect it to come back down to 545, eventually 542. And then we'll just have to see how it goes. With that being said, thank you all so much for listening. Hopefully this video was helpful, guys. Sorry if it sounds like I'm kind of rushing. There's just a lot to go over. But just know, as far as the market goes, see if we get some pops here and there temporarily. But ultimately, the market may see some downside soon. Technicals are looking kind of weak, especially thanks to Aapl with the head and shoulders that formed. So be careful, guys. Do what you have to do, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you, and peace out.